This is a web exclusive from WPRB News. And what follows is the second half of an interview with Peter H. Stone, who's a journalist with the National Journal. And the first half of this originally aired October 23rd on The Dispatch from WPRB News. And our conversation was about several advisors to John McCain who had ties to different, rather shady foreign connections via their former life as lobbyists. Now, the first half of the interview discussed, in particular, Randy Schooneman, who is the foreign policy advisor for John McCain, Rick Davis, the campaign manager, this guy named Chris Ferry, who's a deputy campaign manager, and Charlie Black, who advises the campaign. The second half, which you're about to hear, picks up where that left off and discusses some of the ambiguity involved with the fact that most of these guys have, quote-unquote, suspended their lobbying activity, and Peter H. Stone sort of clarifies what exactly that suspension means or doesn't mean. So without further ado, from WPRB News, here's the second half of our interview with Peter H. Stone. Now, the McCain folks say that advisors like Davis, Ferry, Schooneman, Charlie Black, those we've been discussing, have all stopped lobbying and have taken leaves of absence from their firms.
Correct. I mean, that was a policy the McCain campaign set up early this year in response to some of the early stories that started coming up about the number of prominent lobbyists who had positions in the campaign or were part-time folks. And the campaign set up some guidelines which were intelligent guidelines, basically, so that full-time staffers like Christian Ferry, like Rick Davis, like Charlie Black and Schooneman had to cease their lobbying activities while they were with the firm, while they were with the campaign, take leaves of absence, and basically not do any lobbying for domestic clients or foreign clients while they were employed by the campaign. There were some other rules as well, but that's the primary one, and that was to try to minimize conflicts. But I think the issue I tried to address is that sometimes, even though you've taken a leave, you can sometimes have lingering issues related to perception, or in the case of Davis, a client he was wooing even when he was with the campaign, or a client who was being wooed by his firm, and who was also seen as an asset to the campaign. That would be Mr. Folieri. There's a lot of overlap there, potentially, and so it does raise red flags in the eyes of people who watch these issues, either as foreign relations experts or ethics watchdogs in Washington.
So what does that leave of absence really mean in practical terms? Because it sounds rather ambiguous.
Well, in most cases, I think it's been adhered to. In most cases, I think it has been adhered to. But I think there have been a couple cases, including a couple things involving Rick Davis, where there have been some slippage, let's put it that way, in terms of interests that have extended beyond his full-time employment with the campaign.
Now, how does some of the lobbying we've seen this cycle in the McCain campaign fit into the broader story of lobbying and governance in Washington? Is the McCain campaign, a particularly egregious example of the revolving door, or is it essentially a fair representation of a lot of what happens on both sides of the aisle?
Well, I think lobbyists have often played roles in campaigns. I think the McCain campaign is a little bit top-heavy, more top-heavy than any I recall in recent years, with prominent lobbyists. And it's ironic because McCain has been often a thorn in the sides of the lobbying community in Washington on some issues, including his chairing a Senate committee that looked into Jack Abramoff, who I wrote a book about. But in this case, he has some longtime allies from the lobbying community who are in very senior positions in his campaign. And I think it has raised some issues, not only in this area, the foreign area, but Davis was also involved as a lobbyist for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac prior to the campaign. And given McCain's strong criticism of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, it's a little ironic. I should say too, point out that in the case of one example we've talked about, and that is the Ukraine example. There's also an irony there because McCain himself has been a very strong ally of the U.S. preferred candidate over there, the president, Viktor Yushchenko, and has been critical of the party and the candidate who Davis Manafort worked for. So, again, there's a bit of a contradiction there, and, it does pose some optics issues at the very least for the campaign.
Peter H. Stone, thanks for joining us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this news segment from WPRB News. You can visit us at www.wprb.com/news to find out more about us and what we do.